Well, we got another new thing to learn today, and this time it's MCP apps. Now, this one is kind of cool. For me, at least, I like UI, and that's what MCP apps is basically a UI that MCP apps can return in the chat. So it's cool if you're a user, and it's cool if you're building MCP servers. In this video, we're going to look at how it works and how you can add it to your MCP server today. And then we'll look at what the practical use cases of MCP apps even are. You ready? Let's do it. Hey folks, just one other thing I forgot to put in the video, but at the time of this recording, you need to go to settings and look for MCP apps and settings and turn on this experimental feature. All right, so the easiest way to understand MCP apps is just to see them in action. So let's start with that and do that before we jump into how do you actually create one. And what we're going to do is we're going to use an MCP server to change the color of this light bulb over here. And I'm going to turn you so you can watch the light bulb as it changes. So you don't need to see me. Okay. Bear with me. There we go. So there's an MCP server that I built that just controls the light. So we could say, change the color of the lamp to blue. And this uses, and you'll see I misspell a lot, but it's fine. AIs don't care. So this uses the LIFX, which is just a type of light bulb API. And I have a key that passes, and it's going to pass off and change the lamp color to blue. And it just did, right? So that's just there's a simple MCP server that I built, and it's this right here. Now, MCP apps, because prior MCPs could only return text in the chat. And so if the MCP server needed to get clarification from you or wanted to show you rich content, it couldn't do that. So now we have the ability to show a UI. So what I can do here is just say, show me the lamp control panel. And this is a UI that will be returned by that same LIFX MCP server, but right in the chat. And here it is. So here it is. I built this, and by myself, I mean, of course, Opus 4.5, but I can see all the lights I have. This is the one I want. I can change the color. And if you watch the lamp, it will change as I move around here. I'm sorry, I'm just moving my head to make sure the video is updating. Yeah, it is good. Right. And then we can do effects and other things like that. And all of this is done in the chat here. Now, why would we do this? Well, because it's possible that I might come in and say something like, change the color of the light. Now I have multiple LIFX bulbs, so I haven't told it what color to change it to or which bulbs I want to change. And so Sonnet should be smart enough to look at this and be like, well, they didn't say. It may guess, or it may just show me. Yeah, it does. So it basically says, if you see here, it says, you didn't specify which light or what color, so let me show you an interactive controller. And this is MCP apps in action here. And we're running out of space a little bit because of the zoom. Let me zoom out a little bit. I apologize. So this is MCP apps. This is what we're going to build. This UI can look like anything. You can build anything you want. And so let's get into how we do that. All right, now we're going to start from what I like to call absolute zero, which means we have no files whatsoever. We're starting with nothing. Now, we need a simple Hello World MCP server, and there's a couple different ways we could do this. One of them is we could use skills. If you watched my video on skills, since that video, there's a new site that's popped up that I wanted to show you called skills.sh. And there's all kinds of great skills in here. This site's so cool. This is from Vercel. I love the folks at Vercel. They do so many nice things for developers. Look at this. If we search for MCP, there's an MCP builder skill right from Anthropic. And later on, there's MCP apps. If we're going to do MCP apps, which we are, there's an MCP apps skill here as well. So if you wanted to install one of these, you could just grab it, copy it, come to your terminal in Visual Studio Code and run that, and it will copy everything into your project, your skill. So nice, but we're not going to do that. And the reason for that is because when you're making a video, AI is really stochastic, which means I never know what it's going to do. And I feel like it's just going to confuse you if we vibe things and it doesn't come out the way I want. So what I'm going to do is create this very simple Hello World program, and I'll come right back to you and we'll pick it up from there. All right, let's remove the pie from the oven. You can see here, I've got a package JSON here, and we've got a couple different dependencies, model context protocol SDK for TypeScript, Figlet, which creates the ASCII art that we're going to use to say hello world in our simple Hello World MCP server, and Zod, which is just a schema library for TypeScript. Now I'm going to go back here. We need to take a look at the actual server file itself. It's really not that complex, but let's just take a look at what's going on. So here's our standard imports. And then here at the top, this is where we're going to use Figlet to make the ASCII art. And then here's our tool, just a hello tool, generates a personalized ASCII art greeting. And you can see there's a name argument, which is optional, defaults to world if not provided, right? And so here's some examples here for the model. And then we're just returning that make greeting, which gives us the ASCII art back. Okay, a lot of work to just make some ASCII art. And then that's really all there is to it. So we can now add this MCP server to Visual Studio Code. So there's a build step. I already ran it and it just outputs our built file there. So let's go to add MCP server here, MCP add server. And then the type is standard IO. It's just running locally as a node program here. So let's just say node as the command we want to run, and we'll call it hello world. And then we're going to put it in our workspace just so we can see all of the configuration here. Now you can see it's not actually running here, although it was before, which is why it's picking that up. But let's go ahead, and for our arguments here, we just need to tell it where that JavaScript file is, and it's right there. And if you'll notice, those are the new completions kicking in. Those have really improved in Copilot in the last few months, so you check that out. All right, so let's go ahead and start this. So you can see it started, and there's now just one tool, which is what we had. And now we can go to chat and we can actually test this. So let's go over to our chat and let's pick a small cheap model here. How about VS Code Prime? It's free. And then we can just call our hello tool here. And I'll just say, my name is Bert. And if we've done everything correctly, it should call our MCP server because I've mentioned it to directly and return the ASCII art greeting. And there we go. Very nice. Now, notice that I did call hello specifically. You'll see me keep doing that because hello is just way too broad of a thing to send a large language model. It knows how to answer hello. We'll happily do that. So now what we want to do is, what happens if we just say hello? I don't know if you remember from the code, but do you remember what happens if we just say hello, or what should happen based on the code? It just returns world. That's right. So what would be nice is if the user does not provide a name, then instead of just showing a default, we actually show a form where they can put their name in and click submit. So let's modify our application to do that by adding MCP apps to this project. So first we need to update our package JSON file, which I did here. We need ext apps. And then down here, we need cross-env, which we're using up here in the build command. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then we're using Vite and Vite plugin single file. And we're going to talk about why that is. So in order to understand what we're doing here, we need to understand that for MCP apps, what we're going to have is an HTML file and a TypeScript file that contains all the logic for the HTML file. And then we're going to use Vite to bundle those two things together into a single file. So to do that, we're going to need a Vite config. And our Vite config is going to look like this. Now you're thinking, how am I supposed to remember all this code? You're not, right? We talked about there's skills for doing this. The AI can do this. There's documentation for doing this. We're just doing it by hand so that we can learn without the AI getting in the way. So here's our config here. And then when we run a build, it will call this Vite and it will bundle our two files together. They don't exist yet, but let's create them now. So we're going to put the HTML file at the root of our project here, and let's just call it MCP app.html. So here's our HTML file, and you can see here that it's pretty simple. We've got a very simple CSS framework we're using called Pico, and then it's a very simple form that just says enter your name with a submit button. Very, very simple here. And we could even preview this, although it won't look great, but that's essentially what it will look like in the chat. Okay. Now, the logic for this is coming from this src mcp app.ts, which does not exist. So let's create that. So I'm going to go to the source folder here and create a new file called mcp app.ts. So let me grab the code for that. All right. So this is all of the logic that's going to end up in this HTML file to control that HTML file. And this is going to, if you've written JavaScript before, that's exactly what this is, right? There's like document.getElement by ID, things like that. So as we go down here, you can see that on the submit, what we're going to do is we're going to call the server tool. So what's the server tool? It's hello, right? It's this hello tool right here. So that's the cool thing about MCP apps is that they're bidirectional. So the form can call the server and the server can call back. And we're going to get the result here. And then we're going to pass in the name, right, which we're pulling from the form, pass that to the tool, and then get back the ASCII art. And then here, this is kind of the weird way you have to pull the text out of the response here. And then we're going to set the greeting element inner HTML to be that and escape HTML to make sure everything's safe. So in our index file here, we're going to add in a couple of packages here at the top. We're going to pull in from the ext apps packages, as well as using some file system and path modules for Node. And then we just need to tell our MCP server about this UI resource. And we do that with this UI scheme here. And this UI scheme tells the host, as the comment says, that this is an MCP app resource here. And now we need to add another tool that the MCP server can call to show that UI. So let's come down to the bottom of our file here. We're going to add a new register app tool here called show get name. So that's the name of this tool, and it shows a UI. And here, this is super important. So that resource UI we specified, that's specified here. And this is how the MCP server knows, this meta tag, that this is an MCP app here. And then we're just returning nothing out of the content here because we don't care about that. We only care about the UI. Finally, we need to actually register this UI resource. So you can see here, we're reading in, we're using that path to get the HTML file from here, read it in, and then return this as the UI. So several steps here, but this is how you configure MCP apps if you were going to do it manually. Now that we have this, so let's go ahead and run a build. Okay, and now let's go restart our MCP server. Okay, and now we have two tools instead of just one. So let's go back here and let's call I think it was called show get name. So we'll just call show get name directly here and see if we can force it to show us this input form. And there we go. Let's see here. We can collab. That works perfect. Now, if we say, put our name in and say Burke, what happens? Let's say hello. And it calls the MCP server, which returns the ASCII art and shows it right there. Perfect. Exactly what we wanted. Now, one thing to notice here is that the chat actually finishes even after opening the form because we didn't return anything. We returned nothing from this, actually. You can see our input was that, but we didn't get anything back. And so the chat doesn't wait. It just shows the form and then finishes. So what would happen if we actually wanted to show a form and then have the chat wait for our input? Because that could be one use case for MCP apps, is that we want to solicit feedback from the user. We want to use MCP apps to do it, and we want the chat to wait. So to do that, we're going to need to use a promise and return that promise unresolved, and then have the chat wait until that promise resolves. And I'm going to show you how to do that. All right, so let's go over to our index file here, which is our MCP server. And the first thing that we're going to want to do is declare at the very top here our promise, which we're going to return. And that's pretty simple. It looks like this, right? We're just, at this point, we're just declaring it. We're not actually doing anything with it. And now in our MCP app.ts file here, instead of calling this tool hello, what we want to do is create a new tool called submit name. Okay. So we need to add this new submit to the MCP server. So let's do that. So here's our first tool, hello. So we can collapse this. And here's our second one, which is show get name. And then we're going to create a third one here called submit name. And it's going to be subtly different. Now, the way that it's going to be most different is that its visibility is only to the MCP app. So the chat can't actually see this tool. It can't call it. Only the app can call this tool. So that's another benefit of MCP apps, is that some things you can specify that are tools for the MCP server that only your app can call. And now we're going to go to our show get name, which shows the form. And instead of returning nothing, we're actually going to return that promise. So we're saying await the value of this, right? This, and this is what we're going to actually return up to the chat. Because what we want the chat to do is display the ASCII art equivalent of what we put in. So we need to have it wait here until it gets this back, and then it can display it in the content. So if you follow, it's going to show the UI. It's going to get this. It's going to wait on this to resolve. It's not going to get anything back. It's just going to sit here and spin in the background and wait. And then when this resolves, then this line gets called and actually returned to the chat. The last thing we need to do is make sure that our MCP app is up to date. So we're going to remove all of this greeting text here. And we're just going to call that tool. So it was a server tool, call server tool. And I believe it was name. And the name was submit name. There we go. And the arguments are name. And we don't need to handle the callback here because we're sending everything back to the chat. And so we're just going to send it and forget about it. We don't need to know anything about it. All right, let's go ahead now and run a build. And then we just need to go over to our MCP JSON here, and we need to go ahead and restart that server. So I've restarted it. You can see there's now 3 tools. Now, I thought we said it wouldn't be visible, one of those tools. Well, it's not. If we come here and we look for, what did we call it? It was called the submit. You can see it's not there, right? Can't actually be seen. Now, it can be seen from the app. It just can't be seen from the chat, but we can still call our show get name. And we'll do that with this free included model here. And this should allow us to enter our name in the form, and the chat should wait for us to do that. So you see it waiting here? It's waiting. It's still running. It's just waiting. And it will just sit here and wait. Enter our name. Click say hello. And then it actually gets resolved and the chat continues on, and you can see the value that we passed in the form actually gets sent back to the chat and displayed right here. And that is your crash course on MCP apps. And if you made it through all of this, then you understand a lot about MCP apps now. Again, you can check out these skills here, skills.sh. You can look for MCP Builder, and you can also look for MCP Apps. If you just search for MCP Apps, you'll find an MCP Apps Creator skill here as well. And if I wasn't making a video, this is what I would use to build my apps instead of writing everything by hand. It just works better that way when you want to actually understand what's going on. That's it. And now you understand MCP apps pretty well. And you can go ahead and either build your own, add them to MCP servers, or you can now expect to start seeing them in places where you use AI, these rich interfaces for things like charts if you ask about data, or possibly an org chart if you ask about an organization, right? Because AI shows up in more places than just Visual Studio Code, and so you'll start to see these rich interfaces appearing in places, and those are MCP apps. Thank you for watching, and as always, happy coding.